Hi, here at the BRANDT Research Farm, we're putting agronomic strategies to the test and sharing insights to give you the info to grow. Today we're talking about the importance of planting date for both corn and soybean, what years of data are telling us, and how we can use that to fine-tune decisions for here in 2025 and beyond. Planting date plays a critical role in maximizing yield potential in both corn and soybean. We've seen this shift towards earlier planting, and when we look at the data here at the research farm, we've seen that planting date has been one of the most significant drivers of higher yields across this farm. Earlier planting allows us to leverage more of the growing season. We're harvesting sunlight capture during key growth stages over longer periods. And this has a direct impact on the physiological development of both corn and soybean. In soybean, that means, maybe it's longer reproductive stages or flowering earlier. In corn, it can mean better resource allocation in the plant between the shoot and the root systems. So what we've done is we've taken a decade's worth of planting date trial data from here at the research farm in Pleasant Plains for both corn and soybean, and we've standardized this yield in terms of percent of maximum yield. So a yield at the top of the graph would be the highest yielding treatment, 100% yield potential for that given year, and then you see the percent reduction as we're delaying planting. We get this question all the time, so we'd be planting corn first or soybean first, but as you can see, as we get to a certain point, really both crops benefit equally from being planted early. We follow almost the exact same trend line as we're delaying planting. Now, if we're thinking about planting super early here in late March or early April, soybean tends to outperform corn by a small margin, and really that has to do with uniformity of emergence. If I'm planting into marginal soil conditions, I'm not going to get uniformity of emergence in corn, and I need uniformity of emergence in corn to maximize yield. Soybean's a little bit more resilient. We know soybean can branch out, utilize the space it's in, so that's why I'd favor soybean if I'm planting into maybe marginal conditions. But regardless, for both crops, as we look at this trend line, it matches very well. As long as we're planting before the last week of April, we're achieving 95% of maximum yield for both crops. When we get out to the first week of May, we're already down to 90% of maximum yield for both crops. And then when we get out to the last week of May, we're already down to 80% of maximum yield for both crops. So this decline in potential yield really begins to hasten as we delay planting date farther than May. So for both crops, in our data set, we're seeing that we're achieving our highest yield potential when we're planting these crops in those middle 2 weeks of April, so that second and third week of April. Now, why we see the advantage for either one of those crops is a little bit different because both crops grow and develop physiologically differently from each other. Soybean, we know that soybean development is highly influenced by day length. Shorter days tend to hasten progression through these growth stages, while longer days can prolong plant development. This is critically important for understanding why a soybean crop may benefit from an earlier planting date. By planting soybean earlier, we're allowing that plant to take advantage of those longer days before that summer solstice and at that summer solstice during key developmental growth stages. So what we've seen is that we can flower earlier in the season. We're extending our reproductive growth phases. We're spending more time in that R2 and R3 growth window. That's whenever we're setting new nodes on that plant, as well as beginning flower and pod development. So what we end up with is more nodes on the main stem. That's more points of attachment for pods. So we end up with more pods on that plant. That's a higher yield potential. And then we actually have longer day lengths as we begin pod filling, and that's really important for adding pod weight. What we see with earlier planted corn is because when that crop's coming out of the ground in mid-April, we're not tracking GDUs or heat units as rapidly as a corn crop would be if it was planted in the middle of May. So we're not putting as much energy or wasted energy into vegetative growth. We're putting more energy into that root system, and we're beginning to determine kernel rows around there as we get into early vegetative growth stages. And then also we have the potential to better time this pollination window outside of typical drought periods here in the Midwest. Now, we know that planting early can help us maximize our use in the entire growing season, potentially give us our highest yield potential, but that comes with some added risk. We're planting into potentially marginal soil conditions or variable environmental conditions, so there's a lot of key factors that we really want to pay attention to, and one of the biggest players in this is soil temperature. We know that seed will not germinate or begin its early growth under soil temperatures below 50 degrees, and prolonged exposure to cooler soil temperatures increases our risk for seedling blights or chilling injury. What we're really looking for is for that soil temperature at that 2 to 4 inch depth to reach 50 degrees Fahrenheit or above with a warming trend in the forecast for the next few days. That very first 24 to 48 hours that we put that seed in the ground is most critical. That dry seed is going to imbibe water immediately, and if that first drink of water is cold, it can trigger imbibitional chilling injury. And that could potentially lead to a whole host of issues, from poor root and shoot development or ruptured cell walls in that germinating seed. Now, we know that that seed is going to be much slower to come out of the ground in terms of germination and emergence. One key technology that we really leverage, especially in soybean, is seed treatments to allow us to plant earlier. A good fungicide and insecticidal seed treatment is very crucial for early planting. Slower emergence in those cooler soils prolongs our exposure to those soil-borne diseases and insects. Another important risk we want to take into consideration with earlier planted corn and soybean is looking at what that typical average last frost date is. Specifically here in the Springfield, Illinois area, that date would be around April 20th. Now, luckily, if we're planting earlier, it's going to take maybe 2 to 3 weeks for that seed to actually germinate and come out of the ground, so that gives us a little bit of wiggle room ahead of that April 20th date. Also, with corn, we know that growing point is going to remain below ground for some time. Now, for soybeans, that growing point is above ground, but those cotyledons on the soybean actually act as a pretty strong buffer against fluctuating air temps. It would take several hours below air temperatures of 28 degrees to actually cause a lethal damage on that soybean plant. Another thing that we want to pay close attention to here when we're planting early into cooler soils is the availability of nutrition. The availability of soil nutrition is really mediated by soil temperature, the mineralization of that organic nutrition into inorganic plant available nutrition. What we can utilize is starter fertilizer, specifically things like nitrogen, phosphorus, sulfur, zinc, things that we know that crop is going to be in high demand for early season to get it off to a good start. And we can put very small concentrations of that along the crop row to make up for that lack of mineralization. In summary, here at the research farm, we're seeing that both corn and soybean benefit equally on a relative basis from being planted early. Specifically for here in Central Illinois, that optimal window for planting date is typically going to be in that 2nd to 3rd week of April for maximizing our yield potential. If you're going to push planting dates earlier, we need to pay attention to our soil and environmental conditions to set ourselves up for success. And don't forget, we need to pay attention to what our early and final planting dates are for crop insurance. And if you're thinking about pushing the envelope on planting date, we want to consult with our seed representatives on replant policies. Planting date is just one factor, along with varietal selection, maturity groups, and other crop management practices that can help you increase productivity, better time your harvest on your farm, and spread risk across your farm. We've already started planting here at the BRANDT Research Farm on March 13th, so stay tuned for updates as we track the progress of our planting date trials and share results on fertilizer and biological applications aimed at maximizing early planting response.